Okay, enough of this religious crap. Let's get back to the socialist crap. Which, well, is a form of religious crap because it's a total religion, but anyway.
There are many myths and prejudices about communism.
You know, it's getting harder and harder to understand why anyone would be defending communism. But they're still around, so let's look at one that claims to be debunking 5 myths. Of course, in order to debunk something, you have to use the methods of rationality and avoid using fallacies. Let's see how well he does.
In this video, we will review the most popular myths about communism and tell you what communists are really trying to achieve. Myth number 1. Communism is a dictatorship. Communists are often accused of lacking the democratic qualities of Western countries, of cutting rights and freedoms to put power in the hands of one dictatorial leader. On the contrary, freedom of the bourgeois democratic state is merely illusion and hypocrisy.
And right off the bat, we've got a major one. It's basically, well, your government isn't any better. It's just a tu quoque fallacy. Of course, we anarcho-capitalists don't like so-called democratic states any more than we like yours. So making this point does nothing to debunk the claim, because both of those can be true at the same time. There are a lot of different forms of government, and they all intrude on your liberty and inhibit your freedom. And right quick before we go any further, I'd just like to thank Zigoder for requesting this video on the Lord Killian Discord. If you'd like to join the Discord and engage in discussion, provide videos or articles to debunk, or just sling memes around like there's no tomorrow, the link is below.
In order to maintain unquestioned power, the capitalist class must disguise its dictatorship beneath varying forms of parliamentarism.
Here's the mistake he makes with this first myth. None of these are capitalist. Capitalism is when the government has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the peaceful, voluntary interactions between people. Looks like I'm going to have to link again to my video explaining the definition of capitalism, using a peer-reviewed article on a mainstream economics site as a source. Link is below. If you would, give that one a like and share it too, because if you search for it, the videos you get are generally Marxist drivel like this. This next bit I'm going to play without comment, because I really want you to see the verbal diarrhea typical of commies when they don't have an actual point to make.
The pretty face of democracy and freedom, while at the same time keeping the masses dissuaded from interrupting their governing apparatus, which protects the interests of capitalist profiteering. Control of government by the working class, which can also be called the dictatorship of the proletariat, is established after the liquidation of the dictatorship of capitalists and the abolition of private property. This majority rule is more democratic than any form of bourgeois democracy that has ever existed. The dictatorship of the proletariat is the rule of the working people over an immiserated group of capitalists whose wealth and prosperity only come from the appropriation of other people's labor.
See what I mean? Now let's see the part that exposes him for what he is.
Under socialism, democratic freedoms belong to the majority of people who know they are working for the benefit of all and not pursuing the interests of another.
As opposed to belonging to all individuals everywhere, regardless of their motivations, pursuits, goals, purpose, identity, viewpoint, or vision. It pretends to be classless, but it is the ultimate class-based philosophy. But don't take my word for it.
Socialism is not, however, the final development of society, but only the first step towards communism, a society of free and conscious workers, in which there will no longer be division by class, private property, no oppression of man by man.
Sounds nice, huh? But listen a little further.
Under communism, necessary labor for the benefit of humankind will become the first conscious need.
But who decides what's necessary? Who decides what benefits mankind?
And the abilities of each will be used for the greatest possible benefit of the whole society.
Who decides what benefit that is? And who decides that A will have greater benefit than B, and that people should stop doing B and do more of A? All of this must be determined by some sort of state. dictating to people every last aspect of their interactions with others. And what do you think happens to people who refuse to go along? Anarcho-capitalism is the only true classless society, because the only class that it ultimately serves is not business owners, not workers, not rich, not poor, not the common man, but consumers. And everybody is a consumer. Only the consumer is in a position to say what is and is not a benefit for his or her life. Only the consumer is able to say if A is of greater benefit than B, and only for his or her own life. Other consumers that disagree should have the freedom to choose for themselves. But notice that, once again, in his description of the great communist society, he doesn't even mention the consumer. Not once!
In the future communist society, all people will be involved in managing public affairs.
Why do you think that sounds like a good thing? Have you ever been to a town hall meeting? I don't want anyone managing public affairs. Look at how terrible they are at it. Sheesh, and we're just through the first one.
Myth number 2. Communism is sameness. There is a belief that communism results in universal sameness, flattening the personal needs and private lives of individuals. Such myths are used widely in capitalist propaganda, but have nothing really to do with communism and Marxism. When communists discuss bringing about full equality, they do not mean an equalization of personal needs and lifestyles, but only the equalization of classes to the point where socioeconomic division is no more.
Except you just told us it isn't like that at all. You'd need some kind of central authority dictating what is necessary and benefits mankind.
Marxism advocates for the liberation of all workers from exploitation, the abolition of private ownership of the means of production by capitalists, under socialism for the equal duty to work according to one's abilities and receive according to one's labor.
So basically, instead of workers voluntarily choosing to work for employers in exchange for a wage they agree to, you have, and I'm sure you deny this, but there's no other way to do it, a central authority seizing what they determine to be private property. And see all the other times we discuss the supposed difference between private and personal property and how subjective and undefinable it is, and then force people to work their equal duty, in other words, slavery, based on what the Central Committee determines as their ability, and they get whatever the Central Committee determines they're entitled to. You've shown quite clearly that you want to remove all individual autonomy over people's lives. And that is the reason why these people never mention consumers, because they want to take all of the decisions you make as a consumer away from you.
This is equality from the Marxist understanding, which is not recognized and does not recognize any other equality.
Yep, from his own mouth, he does not recognize the equality we all have as individuals, with agency, sapient, independent thought to make our own decisions as to what is necessary and how much we're willing to contribute and how much we want to demand for what we contribute. You heard it from his own mouth. The only equality Marxism will ever recognize is for everyone to be equally under the jackboot of whatever the Central Committee says.
Myth number 3. Communism causes deficits. Perhaps the favorite accusation leveled against communism and the socialist projects which try to achieve it is that a planned economy inevitably leads to a shortage of goods.
Which it does. At some point you're gonna run out of other people's money. What do you do then?
In reality, communism and socialism have nothing to do with deficits.
Then where do you get the money from?
In fact, socialist production is based out of creating the abundance necessary to maximize the satisfaction of the needs of all people.
Okay, how? How are you even going to begin to get the information you need to do this? I'm not even talking about the economic calculation problem here, although that's a part of it. The bigger concept, the one that it's a part of, is the knowledge problem. To maximize the satisfaction of the needs of all people, you'd need to literally be able to read everyone's minds in real time. And even in such an absurdly ideal scenario, it wouldn't work because people don't often understand what they want or need or what would maximize their satisfaction at any given time. We just muddle through our lives as best we can. More realistically, whatever real-time spying system you set up on everyone to try and make that determination, even if you could sift through all the information you'd get from that, by the time you made a decision and implemented it, it would have changed, and your new plan is inaccurate and suboptimal at best. Not to mention the fact that people's wants, needs, and desires often conflict with each other, and there's absolutely no way to provide some without inhibiting others. This is the problem of calculating wants, needs, and desires and matching them with economic production and consumption, with all the trade-offs having to be made by people other than the ones who have to live with the consequences. This is just way too complex a problem for anyone to solve. All of the issues involved here are what's known as wicked problems. A wicked problem is one that's impossible to solve because of inputs that are incomplete, contradictory, and ever-changing, where not only is there no single solution to the problem, it's going to be resistant to any solution you try and implement. They don't have any stopping rules, so your solution will be in place long after it stops solving anything, if it ever even does. There's no actual way to test your solution to see how optimal it is. It's a one-shot operation, with no opportunity to learn by trial and error. Every attempt has major effects society-wide.
Myth number 4. Communism is take and divide. The myth that communists want to take away everything that people own is intentionally cultivated in a capitalist society, and for good reason.
Because it's true!
In reality, the communists are primarily concerned with the destruction of the private ownership of the means of production, which is the capitalist basis for the exploitation of man by man.
Yeah, this one's gonna be the whole private versus personal property thing. I don't have to go over that again, do I?
Communists propose for the means of production, the factories, grocery stores, farms, and more, to be the possession of the whole society, and for all public goods to be distributed fairly according to need. At the same time, the right of personal ownership, of income based on work, of consumer goods, and of personal items is protected under socialist law.
And you really don't see the contradiction here? How can you have the right of personal ownership of income based on work without the right of the worker to contract with an employer for it? The worker is just going to be your slave, doing what your socialist law requires and getting paid what the central authority says they get paid. And it also contradicts his earlier claim of there not being a state. How else are you going to seize the means of production and protect everyone's income under socialist law? Something else he doesn't mention is the incentive structure. Every economist will verify that this is of paramount importance, and yet he doesn't even consider it. It's just like with the war on drugs. Government decided that no one needed drugs, so they made them illegal. What was the result? A thriving black market of drug producers, distributors, dealers, and users, because they did nothing at all to address the incentive structure. Same thing here. The minute your glorious collective doesn't provide for what someone, in his own individual subjective opinion, feels he needs or wants, he'll go underground to try and get it. And he'll find people willing to provide it at a certain price. Even if you've gotten rid of money, they'll find some way to trade because they'll have their own wants and needs they feel are unaddressed by the collective. They may even come up with their own form of money. Gold or silver or cryptocurrency or whatever. What are you going to do about this inevitable black market?
Today, the needs of transportation are a service for which you must pay, often exorbitantly in the case of personal vehicles.
See, this is a perfect example. It takes a lot of resources to make a car. If someone's going to benefit from a car, they should compensate the car makers for those resources. But if they don't get to keep the car for themselves, why should they do that? He even says,
under communism, the development of the means of production and the qualitative increase in labor productivity will allow everyone to use equally any item that might be necessary.
So if everyone can use equally the car he shelled out resources to obtain, then why would anyone ever do that? And if no one would ever do that, then how would cars ever get made? He'd probably say something like, the central authority would order the cars to be built, and the workers, according to their ability, would be enslaved to build it. He wouldn't put it in those terms, but that's what it would be. But there'd be no real innovation, no real competition, no incentive to make better cars, or even cars that are as good, which is how communist countries ended up making the Trabant. And even worse, how would you ever get new products? If you did this before cars were invented, how would they ever come about? Without entrepreneurs having the freedom to innovate and profit from their innovations, why would they ever take the risk to design a new product? Especially if it could just be instantly taken from them and redistributed. Once again, we see them talking about taking the means of production, but not one word about where the means of production come from to begin with.
Myth number 5. Communism is utopia. For people with only a simple understanding, communism is pictured as a perfect society, devoid of any problems or contradictions, and therefore one of the most frequent attacks on communism is the accusation of its impossible utopianism. However, the era of utopian communist theorizations ended with the developments made by Marx and Engels. Thanks to their work, communism acquired a scientific basis through the universal laws of material development, the laws of the historical process, and the nature perspective of the observable capitalist system.
Then how come it's all completely based on economic fallacies? The zero-sum fallacy, the broken window fallacy, the wage fund fallacy, the collective fallacy, the composition fallacy, they have that one in spades, the free lunch fallacy, the short run fallacy, on and on and on.
There is nothing utopian about building such a social system. The experience of the first historical socialist state, the Soviet Union, showed in practice that communism is not a utopian dream, but proved that enormous victories can be won for the majority of humankind through socialism.
I'm just gonna say it again. Anyone who thinks the Soviet Union was in any way beneficial to the people is just so divorced from reality, there isn't any hope for them. So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.